Let's turn to a question for you here. A lot of this has been about who can be a better senator for Massachusetts. The University of Virginia has ranked all members of Congress for their effectiveness, and during the 115th Congress, you had a lower score than Mr. Markey, and the second lowest score in the Massachusetts congressional delegation. If they think you're not being effective in your current job, why should you get a promotion?
That's a very good question. And by the way, I don't even care about the answer. Joe Kennedy is challenging Ed Markey. Ed Markey, Massachusetts. Everybody loves the guy. Progressive, lefty to the hilt. Believes in Green New Deal, Medicare for all of this other stuff. If you had a lefty president, Markey would probably be the guy that was leading the charge on that. In the Senate, Kennedy, representative, is running against incumbent Markey. Kennedy, Democrat, let's say the weaker end of the gene pool, is running against, again, Senator, Democrat, Ed Markey. Now, why am I stressing that? Why am I emphasizing that very basic point that these two Democrats are going at it and duking it out? Under normal circumstances, there would be nothing wrong with that. But the catch here is that the Democratic Party made a big deal, bitched, moaned completely over the notion of incumbents being challenged. Pelosi comes out right here. Just then, Nancy Pelosi is endorsing Joe Kennedy in the Massachusetts Senate race. Now, right now, the race is dead even. With RCP average has it Markey 44.8, Kennedy 44 point that looks like 8. Basically, it's a tie. This is a big deal, especially from the standpoint of lefties, because personally, I love the guy. I don't live there, but I love the guy in regards to policy-wise. And so a neo-lib Kennedy, who is pretty much saying anything to try to get in that. He's now apparently for Medicare for all or something like Green New Deal, one of those. But I don't need to take a gamble on the weaker, less effective guy when Markey was already doing the job exceptionally well. And as you heard, I was like, dude, you're failing at your current job. Why are you trying to get a raise? I think that's an extremely good question. And nevertheless, Pelosi is going to be there to put the stamp on Kennedy, despite the fact that Pelosi was one of these people bitching about primary challenges. Democratic leaders stand firm on incumbent favor rule, rebuff liberal cries of the blacklist. Here's the other one. Democratic leaders warn it will cut off firms that challenge incumbents. And of course, AOC, not necessarily liking that Nancy Pelosi kind of bitched at her about the incumbent stuff, puts out her tweets, goes after Pelosi, basically saying, I don't want to hear anything from anybody about this whole incumbent stuff again. Now, to me, I love this. I'm fascinated by this. Because to me, this is power politics. It's like a law of power, a rule of power of sorts. And Nancy Pelosi has just taught AOC and progressives a law of power. This is AOC, before I flip over, because I want to explain and give this context. I've been saying for over 2 years, there is a democratic civil war. Now, the very basis or the context of war, almost built into it, is some kind of contest, some kind of conflict, or something that somebody wants that they're willing to do damn near anything to get. Now, if it's absolute, you do damn near anything to get, because your agency and will in some space matters that much more, especially if the other person is trying to take over your particular agency. If it is not necessarily absolute and you have other regional powers, well, then it's constrained. In this very specific case, though, this is a civil war, which means that there is a contest. Who are the players? Well, you have lefties and you have third-way Democrats. The third-way Democrats know what they are. They know what they came from, and they know what they need to do to try to fight back. Lefties, not so much, not so much. Nancy Pelosi is giving you a great lesson on this, and I think we need to talk about what that lesson is. Law of power. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you the opportunity of doing it. I was enamored by this when I saw this. I was like, not surprised, but wow. Just wow. Now, Joe Biden, in fact, let's put the Joe Biden part for last, because there's a level of dickishness to this that is epic and subtle, that is just, I love. Even though it's pretty, lefties, I should just say, take as a lesson. AOC beats Crowley. Crowley was there for, 30 years? And AOC says, basically, we need to primary some folks. Now, this was heard as a thunderclap. What? And not just primary some folks, the fact that AOC won, became almost a celebrity overnight, gave her magnificent influence, at the very least from the standpoint of a megaphone. Now, there was a few of people like AOC, they call these guys a squad, but it was a small club of them, even though they might have had outsized voice just because the wins were somewhat historic and some of the things that they were saying were against the typical grain of what it meant to be a dinosaur. Well, in this very specific case, incumbents, third-way Democrats, responded. And they responded through the organs of the DNC leadership, the CCC and the DSCC. Basically, the organs that get various candidates elected throughout the United States. Oftentimes, what you would have is that Democrats, the brain trust, selects the candidate that they want and helps that candidate out, even if it's against other contestants that are in those races that actually want to run to do something else. The DNC, or DCCC, with those way behind it, or DSCC. In one case, there was the one where Steny Hoyer told the guy to get out the race. And he's like, what do you mean get out the race? He said, look, we've already chosen a guy. This is a guy. This is the person we're going to back. But understand what that means. That means that a brain trust that has a organized certain point of view of the world that all of these guys, for the most part, agree with, meaning third way, neo-libs, markets are great, and all of this stuff, even though they will say lefty things, will choose somebody that is within their frame of reference. Meaning, this brain trust is choosing someone else to add to their brain trust that is something like it. It keeps, let's say, an organized, perpetual ideology of the world of some degree. They're basically a capitalist, markets-based, imperialist ideology. And that way they can maintain it as they go through time. Now, the problem here is that when lefties and AOC say we're going to primary some folks, and lefties every so often started to win, even recently with Jamal Bowman. These guys are not on the same page. These guys are dramatically different in many respects. It depends on the person, and it varies to some degree. But the ideology of Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar, especially when it comes to Israel, especially when it comes to foreign policy, is dramatically different than what goes for the mainstream of the party. If you get more people in, like a Bowman or an Ilhan or AOC, well, you can see the problem, right? The brain trust starts to break down. The ability for them to say, okay, I want to pick that guy, or even the ability to have sway within the context of what they do regarding law gets undermined. Now, in this case, putting in the rule, blacklisting rule or banning rule, meaning anybody that works with an organization trying to primary an opponent gets blacklisted. That's basically what it is. If you are one of these lefty groups and you're trying to primary one of the opponents and the DCCC finds out about it or the DSCC finds out about it, we will blacklist you. You would not be able to work with anything dealing with our business. Now, this is apparently supposedly a big threat because apparently there is just a group of vendors apparently that these guys tend to use. But you get the point. It tries to stop and inhibit or at the very least slow down lefties getting in office. Now, there's two reasons for this. One, as I said, they want to keep the brain trust as it is. But it also slows down the process because if these guys have to get new vendors, which means they may be new to politics, the new vendor may not necessarily be all that adequate to suit for whatever particular need, and maybe that vendor loses once or twice. Eventually, that person gets more experience and maybe they win. Maybe they even win it on the second go round. But she was still successful in slowing down an ability for people to actually participate in the political process on somewhat even terms based on their own ideologies of the world. The slowing down helps you because whatever that momentum is, that if in the lefty movement may also slow down over time if something else intercedes, meaning she might just in that one step mitigate lefties or people with this particular ideology getting in the Congress for X number of years. Even though left to its own devices, you might have had more sooner. If you are looking at this from the standpoint of, let's say, like an AOC, you get it. You're trying to stop people like me from getting in Congress. And that is exactly the reason why it was put into place, to stop people like you and your ideology, your point of view of the world from getting in Congress, whether that's Senate or the House. Here's the catch. If you turn around and say, yeah, get him, Kennedy, and Markey is the incumbent, then that looks weird. It looks hypocritical. Now, if you're looking at the world in the sense of hypocritical, if you're looking at the world from the sense of, that seems unfair, that's kind of wrong, etc., I would tell you that this is a contest. And in trying to pursue this contest, you have two competing sides, Democrats, lefties. From the standpoint of the Democrats and the lefties, the power distribution is clear. Democrats. Those Democrats decided to make a rule. Those Democrats then flagrantly ignore that rule because they're in the power source in order to determine how those rules get dispensed. Meaning nothing is going to happen to Joe Kennedy because they didn't like Markey. They wanted Markey out of that seat. And because they themselves are part of the war, despite the fact that they are also fighting the war, meaning they're institution and the participant, they get sway. Power doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need a justification. The notion of right and wrong, those things I've said before, aren't real. Ethics aren't necessarily real. And I've argued that law is not real. Those things are conceptual models. Those things are conceptual models that were only held up by some institution or something that allows those things to hold up. In this case, Nancy Pelosi, one of the people in Democratic leadership, says, yeah, we're going to blacklist. The moment that is somebody who she wants, she no longer cares about the blacklist. What blacklist? What are you talking about? These guys are, and I'm pretty sure they would even come up with some kind of very specific thing that allows them to say, well, this is not the same thing as the other thing. Look, the left really needs to organize. And I say this because I don't know how long it's going to take for a crop of lefties to get into Congress. No idea. And this race, apparently Markey was looking good in this race. And so hopefully he finishes and wins it. It puts pretty much an end to Kennedy, at least from the standpoint of the Senate. But they have certain institutional advantages. Not just institutional, meaning even from the standpoint of what they're willing to do and how they're willing to behave. And just from the standpoint of organization. They understand, in real terms, that the last, let's say, rulers of the Democratic Party were lefties. The Roosevelt Democrats. Now, they also understand that they were able to take these guys out of their seats to the point where they got in power, which means in their heads, collectively, they totally understand we want to retain power. And we need to do what we need to do to retain power. And if that means passing a rule to hold up lefties, we will pass up that rule. Hypocrisy is not a real thing. It's a description of an action. And so we don't care. Meaning from their standpoint, yeah, they're going to pass that rule. And yes, that rule is going to be specific to lefties. And no, it's not a rule in the real sense. It's only a rule in the sense that we need something that can undermine and hinder who we consider a combatant in that war. Hence this rule. The rule only applied to lefties. I'm just saying, when this article came out and said Democrats put this rule up, my thought was, that's only for lefties. They're never going to use that against a candidate from the neo-lib side of the party, meaning basically the most of the party. That's entirely going to be for these lefties who they don't necessarily want, these firebrands that are coming into Congress that are basically trying to take these guys out and try to pull the ideology of the party to the left, which is basically out of sync, which is where they are. Yeah, I love that. I really hope Markey pulls this out. But law of power, man, we don't need to be consistent, nor do we need to be fair. That's not necessary. And if we indeed are the rule makers, then we can do pretty much what we want, especially if you don't have anything that you can do in response. This gets into the whole tit for tat stuff. My mom would say, tit for tat, that's so childish. And I say, somebody throws a rock at your window every morning. You go out, tell them to stop. They don't. What do? And whatever you do, whether that's call the cops, whether that's go beat the shit out of them, whether that's, whatever that is, that's attacked. Meaning you have to have some, if your will and your agency is coming up in contest with somebody else, I want you to stop throwing the rock into the house. And they say, well, I want to throw it at the house. Well, there has to be something there that meets that challenge. Meaning you either let the guy keep doing it or you do something about it. The tact is doing something about it. Now, the catch here is whatever that doing something about it is almost a miniature war in and of itself, depending on how you want to call it, where agency and will is trying to be expressed in that particular environment. The cop comes, doesn't catch the kid, morning he does it again, and again, and again, and again. And at some point, it escalates. And this kind of is what I'm getting to. If you don't have any capability of get attacked, a response, something that inflicts some sort of pain or leverage onto the other party, in that conflict, whatever that conflict is, then you have nothing to stop that other party from continuing to do what they do. When the United States goes out and the CIA goes and murders a bunch of people around the world in regards to South America and putting in dictators and everything else, that is against the law internationally. And if I'm not mistaken, it's against our own laws. Nobody gets prosecuted for that. Even when you get into recent times, where you get Iran, where we're trying to take them over, or Venezuela, it's open, it's overt. Same thing with Syria. It's on the pages of the New York Times. Libya. Everybody knows it. Nobody does anything about it. There are no consequences. You can wrap it into any notion of law all you want, but at the end of the day, it is against the law. But again, I've said it before, international law doesn't exist. Law in and of itself doesn't exist. It's not a cosmic thing. It's a conceptual framework. What matters is power, and where that power is dispensed and distributed, and how that power is activated and used. And you have various power centers in your particular community, and those things, get less and less and less. I'm just saying, in this case with Pelosi, yes, she can take a position being in leadership and being in power if she thinks that whatever happens, she's unaccountable in regards to that position. Meaning, yes, I am a hypocrite here, but so what? And you're like, what? You're a hypocrite. So what? She gets in her car, goes get some ice cream. You feel some kind of way about it. Nancy Pelosi is not accountable to you. And this is kind of what I'm getting at. For lefties to have any sort of influence where this level of hypocrisy, it's one thing if you say this is going to be a rule and it applies to everyone. That rule sucks. That rule is targeted. That rule is directed. But there's some level of infringement of somebody else where people get offended by. But in this very specific case, this rules for lefties. This is not a law or rules for the entirety of the Democratic Party, and they know it, which makes it that much more horrible. If they were organized, if they had numbers, whether they were using crowds and everything else, you can mind the gap on something like this. Meaning the moment they put this rule in place, if you had some way to impinge leverage or make something hurt, you could have pulled the rule up. But you could not pull the rule up, which shows the weakness of that particular side of the party. Lefties need to organize. And I mean organize from the standpoint of internally, but also organize the mob. This is kind of when I get to when Sanders is doing politics wrong. What do you have at your disposal? As Sanders, as AOC, as Ilhan, as any of these people, when you're going into some kind of meeting or you're going into some kind of contest where you want to get something passed, or you're even going into some kind of rule change that the party is coming up with, you as an individual probably have nothing. And considering the number of people who are lefties in Congress, you probably have very little compared to the people who are not. What you may have, though, depending upon where you are, is the mob, the crowd. When Sanders is doing those stadium speeches and everything else, when AOC is doing those bomb-blasting speeches and whatnot, when you're going into negotiation with Joe Biden, what do you have? You have that. What does Joe Biden need to get elected? That. And if you have that, and he needs that to get elected, that's called leverage. Whether you use that or not is a different question. In the case of Sanders and many of these other people, they don't. The moment they folded up their tent, they just said, okay, screw it, I'm done. Missing the point that if Sanders, what happens? If Sanders goes out and says, look, if Joe Biden doesn't support Medicare for all with 88%, you probably shouldn't support him. Otherwise, Joe has my support. People's head would explode. But with a party or policy that has 88%, how do you even argue that yes, Joe Biden is right for not accepting that policy with all of these people unemployed and out of a job and out of health care? Meaning, if you take a position that basically embarrasses the other side and then makes them explain and justify their position, you are just in the midst of a negotiation. That's all politics is. That's all unions are. And yeah, at the end of wars, or at the very least the beginning of them, that's where you are. You're trying to mend the gap. I'm not going to bitch on Sanders. I'm just... Look, what Nancy Pelosi is doing may be dickish, it may be annoying. You may think, wow, that's really hypocritical. Nancy Pelosi doesn't care. Nancy Pelosi is in power with the other members of the party where they can make rules, and when they want to, they can flagrantly ignore those exact same rules. It's called power. It's what power is to some degree. Oftentimes, it is unaccountable, which is why it's power. If the lefties wanted to do something about it, your chance, I keep saying this, your power in this, your leverage, is to make them lose. That's your leverage. And to make that more succinct, by the way, the fact that they're stopping lefties from challenging incumbents would mean that the only way that those things will ever change over is they will lose to a Republican. Meaning, I don't want to lose to somebody like Ilhan. They may actually win that. I want to lose to the Republican. Like, it's fucking folly. You need to respond to that. Like, you must understand, if you have no response to the Democratic Party doing that, then you have no power in that process. And you need to find some leverage, some tool, some way of action where you can actually respond to their actions, even if it's not necessarily on the same level. Your lefties, your power is to let them lose. I keep saying that. Same thing with Joe Biden. If you're standing under a policy that has 88% support, and Joe Biden is basically saying, no, I'm not going to accept that policy, and your group makes it extraordinarily clear, with 10 million people, we will let you lose if you don't back this policy. And be willing to do so until that happens. Nothing changes because they continue to run roughshod, not necessarily having anything to push back on what they themselves want to do. The establishment belongs to a shadow government like various institutions. Only you understand that you are in the dark. DNC will shut you out. It's not the DNC, it's the D. In this case, we're talking about the DSCC and the DCCC. I'm just saying, look, the play to stop people from running is done from the standpoint of a brain trust of a group of people that have a certain political ideology that they're defending and that they're trying to stave off coming from something else. People sometimes look at the Democratic Party like it's one thing. It's not. The factions in the party, whether or not they're sharpened in regards to how well they know and establish that these guys are not my friends, and we may co-sign certain policies together, but at the end of the day, I am trying to take over so I can pass the policies that I want. Until the left has a really keen understanding of that and almost a cutthroat way of working together in order to achieve their various policy aims, then this doesn't change. Nancy Pelosi can do this hypocrisy because the left can't do anything about it. If the left has some kind of organization, some kind of input, some kind of club to use, and again, the club is to potentially be willing to let them lose. It's not a great club. I mean, leverage is not always, the best thing in the world. If I have to shoot myself in the arm in order to stop you from mugging me, maybe I might do that. But that still sucks. It hurts. No, Nancy Pelosi is giving AOC a lesson in power on this. Because honestly, Nancy Pelosi does not give one shit about AOC bitching about being a hypocrite. The rule was put into place in order to slow those down. The rule accomplished exactly what they needed to accomplish. The only factors in that is action and consequence. The action, we need to stop them and slow them down. Consequence, we did that. Is there any kind of extra, ancillary thing? AOC is bitching about it. Does AOC have any power to do anything? No. Does it matter? No. And look, whether you're talking about international politics, where you have these national governments that have such powerful militaries and everything else, ICC would watch Iraq get decimated to the tune of 1 million. Would watch Syria get decimated to the tune of how many ever, 500,000. Would get Libya get decimated. Will be on the pages of the New York Times that the United States was funneling money into back projects and the mercenaries in order to get those particular wars fomented and going. ICC clearly gets the newspapers, clearly knows it. The criminal court tries to investigate the United States for war crimes, and the United States attacks the criminal court. Now, technically, the United States shouldn't be able to be charged with this, but the catch is that if you are a nation that is a co-signer to this, then yeah, you get investigated. That nation was Afghanistan. So we attack the criminal court. That should tell you something in and of itself. I'm saying laws are often made in order to criminalize something that a ruling class doesn't like. Right, wrong, good, bad. None of it entirely applies. If somebody says, okay, I'm going to put this guy in pot for 30 years, and he's like, whoa, that seems, excessive. Whether it seems excessive or not is irrelevant. The law is a power center, and as being a power center, you can do such things. In the same case, though, you may have somebody else that you don't care as much to prosecute, in which you give it a nod, you give it a pass. Laws are often put there by the ruling class in order to criminalize behaviors. Sometimes they even threaten the ruling class in and of itself. But the laws themselves can be arbitrary. You may have arbitrary is just the will of the overriding public. It's not good, bad, right, wrong, ethical, moral, or anything else. Slavery was on the books. It was ethical, moral at the time, apparently. We find that, abominable at this point. At least some of us do. And even now, we put people in cages for smoking a plant. That is atrocious. Hell, you could write a law that said it's against the law for even saying it's atrocious. No, the law is not real as a conceptual center where people kind of orient around. And if somebody is being paid to put you in prison for that, then that person is probably going to do just that, regardless of whether it's ethical, moral, etc., etc. Those things don't exist. Those things are entirely societal driven. And unfortunately, fairness doesn't necessarily apply. It's just power politics. Think of pot laws. Marijuana laws was basically put up by the Nixon to put blacks and hippies in prison. Nixon was bothered by those groups being power centers, and he thought that they were combined in order to come and basically contest his presidency. That freaked him out. Nixon, who understood, look, we're a power center. We want to maintain this power center. And he passes laws on the books in order to get the public to basically castigate and demonize blacks and hippies as they get put in prison each night for smoking a plant. Yeah. Power is not, this stuff is not good, bad, right, wrong. It really does boil down to leverage. How can you, how much agency do you have in a particular environment, especially when your agency comes in contact with somebody else's agency? Whatever that space is. I mean, it could be chess. It could be, in a bar where both of you guys are hitting on a female. It could be in your own mind. But that stuff is still contest, conflict. And I'm fascinated by this particular one between, I guess they would call it squad or lefties, and that particular movement. And the current Democrats who are trying to basically stave off that, clearly trying to stave off that. And, notice something. Nancy Pelosi could have held that tweet. I mean, she knows Joe Biden is trying to get elected. They're having the Democratic National Convention, and you're having all of these right-wingers basically dance and parade around stage. And despite the fact that she knows she signed on to that agreement, she doesn't care. She doesn't care. Jay Bacon, if Trump wins, we gain leverage, but God knows. Oh, right. God knows this will do for 4 more years. If Biden wins, the leverage of the left will be lost. That's the catch. Yes. I hope you understand what he means by that, right? It's not without consequence. I don't even say this to go with the idea that it's without consequence. Meaning, looking at your election system as multiple years, not necessarily over 1 year. And you could see that in kind of this narrow focus way, these candidates get worse and worse and worse and move farther and farther to the right, because basically all notions of accountability has been removed with a docile left that just basically accepts whatever random Democrat they put up, believing, unfortunately and wrongly, that you guys are on the same side. in 2020 when Sanders was up and Sanders, they thought he was going to run away with it. And they asked everybody on this stage, if Sanders gets the most delegates, will you basically give him the nomination? Each and every one of them said no. And the problem with that is that each and every one of them knows that if you rip it out of Sanders' hands, no Sanders supporter is going to vote for you. Satan himself can be on the other side of that, and you will lose the general election. In fact, they will probably be actively after you. So each one of them was willing to tank it in order to stop Sanders, meaning your ideas. Millions of people, the majority, in fact, they're willing to tank it all. Top upper echelon of the party. This is not the public. This is the point I'm trying to get across. The representative of the public, if you ask the public, what do you want? Well, the majority of the policy proposals came back, Sanders wins it. Who do you think is more electable? Joe Biden. And they went with the guy who they thought they could beat Trump because they were so desperate and broken as human beings and battered as political figures that, yes, I agree with his policies, but I'm terrified of Trump. So, okay, I'll give him my vote. Now, that's pathetic and sad for a society to get to that point. But that's where we are. But at some point you have to stop that, right? I mean, at what point does the gimmick or the game stop? At what point does the 4 years come where you realize, okay, this has gone on for so long that the candidates have gotten so bad that the overwhelming majority of the people that don't vote, people of color, and people making under $30,000 a year, which means basically the base and contingent of people that Democrats would typically get stopped voting, especially in presidential elections, which is, of course, disastrous for the Democratic Party. But understand, they're doing that because they don't necessarily see any material gain for the investment of energy or thought into the political process. It keeps getting worse. These candidates basically have a generally similar idea of the world. And even though, Republicans may be horribly from the material standpoint, the Democrats are taking you to the same place. Whether you go to the right at 80 miles an hour or whether you go at 40 miles an hour, you are still going to the right. And at which point do you stop that? Is there any point where you said to yourself, well, wait a minute. If Bill Clinton is going to sell out Medicare for all or sell out Social Security, I'm against that. And I'm so against that I'm willing for Bill Clinton to lose. Because if I give him my vote and support on that, he is basically going to be enabled and emboldened for policy that I find utterly atrocious. And I am so on point for that. I'm willing to let him loose. If people did that earlier, you wouldn't have Trump. I'm talking about accountability. The notion that a candidate says they're going to do X and then they don't do X. And because you're terrified of a Republican, you just kind of go with it. Enabling, and not just enabling, incentivizing that person to do the exact same thing again, over and over and over. You're losing the Republican as a foil to basically allow them to do whatever they want in their office. If you are a lefty, you are very familiar with what I'm talking about. All of these people, the majority of the public say Medicare for all. The majority of the public say, yeah, school. The majority of the public are like, yeah, we need to increase taxes on the rich. Media, who is that rich? And the political space, who also is that rich? And is paid by of that rich, say to themselves, yeah, fuck that. We don't need to talk about that. And so we're going to talk about stuff that pertains to us in our class. But we're going to pretend as if that pertains mostly to you. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But what the media talks about is often utterly detached from reality. The stuff that the politicians argue about are utterly detached from reality. It is a circus. But it is a circus because they ignore the real material concerns of the public. Do you believe for 1 minute that if you had just rational people go on the streets, random person, and you say, hey, what do you think about this? And you explain it to them. What they will probably come back with is a more rational solution than what many of the people in Congress come back with. Because they're not looking at it through a lens of, what do I gain out of it? Who's putting money in my pocket on this? Who is this going to hate? Is somebody going to dislike this? Is somebody going to not give me money for this? Is somebody going to put money against a political opponent for this? They're just looking at it through the lens of what's more ideal. And that is an aggravating aspect of our politics. These people are not beholden to us. Lefties who function on this notion of ideology tend to have let's say, a thicker skin, or not necessarily folding into the notion of cash and this kind of game that takes place in Washington where these guys just follow the interests of the people who pay them. Their ideology is somewhat of a substitute for that. And that ideology being somewhat of a substitute for that just basically says we need to take care of people and we need to take care of our affairs. And let's do this. And the other branch say, yeah, fuck that. We don't need to do that. We can do what we want. What are you going to do about it? You're going to vote for the Republican? Which is the point. If they can always scare you into voting for them, then what will you ever get out of this process? Think about it for a moment. Put up 40 years. Campaign after campaign after campaign. Let's say for the moment that the Democrat comes back and says, yeah, we're going to privatize Social Security. Fuck it. We're going to do it. You're running against Trump. Who do you want? Me, who's going to privatize Social Security, not going to like it, or Trump? What kind of choice is that? What if it gets worse? And you get like Ted Cruz, and then you get somebody else who's pretty much just Biden number 3. What do you do? I guess I'm saying at some point your society has to get out of this mindset where you're stuck between two horrible sides that are basically captured by corporate interests, where you are just held out the process. Lefties that are trying to get into power are basically the public getting sick of that and trying to claw back power in some way. But these guys are still massively, not necessarily in sorts yet. But again, they just started. They did just start. Xavier Foster, but Xavier, Jay Bacon, yeah. Look, the club that you have is that you can threaten to make them lose. You understand that the club has consequences. Think of it like a union or labor, where a union working with a company, the company is fucking over the people of that company. And it's screwing over the people of the company. Eventually, those people organize and say, okay, fuck it, we got to leave. Now, the boss can say, if you don't want to be, you can always leave. I don't have to pay you, I can bring you somebody else. But at the point where you have a strike, well, you've stopped the company from making cash. You stopped yourself from making cash, meaning you are injuring yourself in the very process of trying to injure the boss to show that you have leverage in the process, so your will and agency to some degree can be affirmed, at the very least to the level of an agreement of some sorts. If you're not willing to do that, you're always going to be taken advantage of. That's politics. If you give them your vote, they're going to say thank you. They're going to do something else. Why do you think that James Clyburn could get out there and said Joe Biden picking Kamala Harris is basically a gift to the black community? Now, his point was, people always say that they're taking advantage of blacks. Now, I hope that stops by me choosing a black woman for this position. How stupid is that? You've already had a black president. Now, understand you're saying that, but so what? She's black. And then for people to accept that political theater as if it's something. Understand why Kamala Harris is a gift that's not a gift. She has the same ideology, meaning she's going to maintain and keep and propagate Obamaite, Clintonite, etc., third way ideology. And on top of that, she's basically changed on the outside from the standpoint of color, continuity on the inside in regards to ideology. But she's not a gift to anybody. If you tell me, hey, I'm supporting Medicare for all, great. And you make the point that, look, blacks were dying 5-1 or 3-1, depending upon where they were, due to COVID. A lot of that had to do with healthcare issues that came back from basically a long term of economic disparities. Okay, great. So me putting through a Medicare for all plan directly impacts that specific community. If I'm advocating for that, I don't care if you're white, gay, trans, alien. I don't care if you were a little person. I don't care even if you were a ham sandwich and it was just a letter sticking into you. I can support that. Because that person is literally supporting those communities if they are pushing that policy. Same thing with getting rid of school debt. I'm making the point that having a black face up there as an identity doesn't do anything in real terms for those communities. Having somebody with any face, any disposition, that does support Medicare for all does. There's a difference between a push of policy and a push of identity. That push of identity is almost done in lieu of policy. It's a dodge. It's like if somebody asks you a question and you threw a smoke bomb in a room and ran. Basically, they put up those faces there thinking that they have ideas of what it means to be black, white, gay, straight, whatever. And with that idea, they're going to say, all right, we'll put a black face up there. And the various identities will identify with that black face, almost magically, almost in a spiritual way. And it's so spiritual and so magical that they would just assume implicitly that that person was something like them, that they represented them somehow, just by definition of their face. That is the most ludicrous shit ever. Obama's blackness didn't stop him from giving 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. nor did they stop him from letting homeowners go bust. So let's put that to bed for the moment. What matters, real terms, brass tacks, is policy. The other stuff, it's nice if you put a black person there that was a woman that had the policy like that. I'd applaud the shit out of that. But you must understand the priority over everything else is policy. If you're going to tell me that somebody is helping my particular community, then you better give me the policies that are doing it. Her black face doesn't. It just doesn't. I'm sorry. It's a slap in the face to even do something like that, believing that this token gesture is enough for the black community, that we basically use 91% of the vote for Clinton or 93% and a huge amount to get Joe Biden over the finish line. So yeah, we're going to give you this black face and, call it even. Call it even. Thank you so much. You gave us Kamala Harris. Oh, we're not being taken advantage of. It's fucking ludicrous. And the media takes it and runs with that as if that's a legitimate reason to pick a candidate. I'm picking a candidate because I just wanted to be a token black woman so I can say I picked the first one. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Your hands are too dainty, man. Bob Ramirez. Uh-oh, Bob. There we are. Now, Bob is going to say you should vote for Trump. That's Bob's point. Now, Bob's point is if you accept the premise that I just made, that the Democratic Party is basically running a scam by being least worst. Both parties are corporate captured, and they found a strategy. Okay, we can just be a little bit worse than a little bit less worse than the Republicans, and then we can make a pragmatic choice for people to vote for us. That's how we'll do it. And issues of policy and everything else and economics out the window, because at that point you're just least worst. Meaning you can move in the direction of the people who want to give you cash. Perfect. Problem. You're supposed to be on the left. Meaning you taking all of that cash and you doing all of those favors and all of those laws and all of those policy changes and being silent on some stuff that the Republicans are. You doing all of that is going to run roughshod over the lefties in your party. You basically allow people who are workers, and you've infused millionaire owners in the same party with the workers. And you're trying to make the argument that, no, we can do this fairly. It was utopian. So workers no longer have any particular party to represent their interests. And the owners have a party pretending to be workers, or pretending to represent the interests of the workers. Dollars are pitchforks. You have docility in our politics, meaning you have dollars. And with blue no matter who, and with less worse, and all this nonsense, the parties slid further and further to the right. Why wouldn't it? If 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, and the only thing you have around you is cash, it would be weird for you not to go to the side with the most cash. Not to mention, it's not even a law of God or something at this point. It's your electoral system that allows that to take place almost in a mechanical fashion. If you know that, why wouldn't you do that? Meaning, if the only way you can get elected in your head, based on the framing of the way you see the world, is take a lot of cash, be willing to support those people who are giving you that cash, maybe show deference, maybe it's not even you affirmatively going after law, maybe it's you just not being there that day to help that thing pass, whatever that is. And you think, okay, well, I can work around the edges. I can be an incrementalist, but this is what I got to do. Most of these guys have done that. I mean, 75% of their time is spent begging for cash. And if you are talking and begging for cash for 75% of the time, what is your point of view going to be? What was your point of view even to get into that particular business in the first place? And is that point of view in alignment with basically the populace of the country, the lefties, or for that matter, the majority of the country when you get to things like healthcare, education, and Social Security? No, it's not. It's oriented around the people who are giving you cash. The media, who engages with politics, are oriented around the people who gives them cash. Their point of view of the world is of that 1%. But understand, this is like a small body of human beings that is basically making choices for 300 million people. And you can even make a case that's larger than that if you talk about the United States and the way they use patsy nations in Europe. The only way to change that, Bob's point, is to make them lose. And I think Bob's dig at me is that I would say, yeah, you have to be willing to stand under policy and make them lose. And they have to be willing to allow them to lose until there's some change or some fundamental interregnum where there's a change of power. But I would say, yeah, fuck that, I'm not voting for Trump. Now, Bob would be like, yeah, you got to vote for Trump. If that's your understanding of the world. Meaning, if you say your strategy really is to make them lose, like you're basically saying, we have no leverage other than the ability to force concessions. And the forcing of concessions come in one or two ways. Either they lose or they give up something in order to get your support. Meaning if Sanders basically said, okay, fair enough, I lost, but you're not going to get my support and the 30 million people that are backing me unless you back Medicare for all. And he walks out the room and he goes home. Now, they can bitch, they can moan. The bitches and moans don't mean one thing. At the end of the day, if they acquiesce, they get those votes, they win. If they don't acquiesce, they lose. Your standard was set. You stood by your standard. And the next time of negotiation, at the very least, they know that you're serious about standing by the standard. The problem is there's a consequence in the sense that Donald Trump wins. I mean, you don't have a way out in this. There's no magical door. Whether it's Trump, whether it was, I don't know, Mitt Romney, whether it was, at some point, there would have to be a line in the sand where you say, yeah, no more. We don't accept this. And not only not accept this, you need to lose in order to even change up the process. Consider for the moment, when when Clinton lost, lefties ran roughshod. Think about what happened. We told you we were going to lose. You're a failure. We told you we were going to lose. You're going to lose. And all of these lefties, especially on Twitter, social media, basically ran and danced in this rain after Clinton lost. Because basically our argument was, we told you the country was looking for something fundamentally different. And we had an alternative in the sense of Sanders. There was a huge amount of energy in his campaign, and you had none of that. And you lost. That's pretty damning and indicting. And so Democrats said Russia and just kind of ran with that. But Bob's point is, look, if you want them to lose, you have to vote for Trump. I don't buy the voting for Trump stuff. I don't want my name on anything that he does. Obama's blackness didn't stop him from being, slave, right, for Libya catch, yeah. Because I don't know how many people know this. Libya had gotten to the point after Obama, France, and Britain destroyed it that they were selling slaves. Libya is one of the richest countries apparently in that region, and yeah, I think you can buy a slave for like $300. Let's see. Check out Millie Weaver's Shadowgate documentary. Millie Weaver. All right, guys. I'm dragging ass. This video has gone way, way, way longer than I ever thought it was going to go. Let's see. Do you think MPP will have a huge effect? That's a good question. So he's talking about the People's Party. This is what is his name? What is his name? I can see his face. He was here. I did an interview with him sitting right here. It'll come to me. That's Nick Branagh's organization. It might. I mean, Nina Turner speaking there, Marianne Williamson. I was shocked to see Nina Turner speaking there. But her and Marianne Williamson, there seems to be a lot of people that are talking about it. The problem is that despite Nancy Pelosi just pulling this fast one where, yeah, those will rule just for you. Sucks. But what are you going to do about it? Or for that matter, AOC basically getting snubbed in a speech, or having a Republican basically take a slap at her. Like, those things bite sometimes. And for whatever reason, lefties are perfectly okay with taking abuse like that. And they would still turn around and vote for the people who abuse them. And at no point do they ever think to themselves, how do we stop this roller coaster? How do we get off this train? Because every 4 years, you're stuck with the same thing over and over and over. Here's this person who sucks going against a person who sucks plus a nanometer more. You guys need to make a choice. And then it's practical to vote for the person who sucks 1 nanometer more. That guy is only building 4 concentration camps. The Republican is trying to build 6. Isn't it righter to vote for the guy that's building 4 concentration camps? And then you get that shit for like 4 months. If at any point they wise it up and they realize, oh, right, this is a Chinese finger trap. We're being scammed. And we're being scammed in the way that they would not accept being scammed themselves. Again, they were willing to torch it all in order to stop Sanders. Which means that if they were willing to torch it all to stop Sanders and you're not, then that is always a negotiation area to which they can go and to get you to react or to compel behavior. To some degree, you can understand why. Nancy Pelosi has $100 billion. She's not hurt if Trump wins. You may not. And you may be hurt when Trump attacks the post office and then your medication gets there several days behind. So there are consequences to that stuff. I just don't think there's a magical door. And all of the things that you come to hate about your society, you realize was implemented, co-signed with Democrats. Weak, milquetoast, and again, regardless of how fast they're speeding into the particular direction on the right, they're still going to the right and they're taking you and the policy there with them. The longer you allow this to go on, the further you get to the right, even though you make it there a little bit slower. This road or this trick needs to come to an end. If the People's Party is able to draw enough people out of the Democratic Party, enough battered lefties, then maybe, even if you get like 10 million people who basically are under the umbrella of one particular model of thought, meaning regarding policy, that has influence, especially if those people are in certain areas that can influence various vote totals or stop or collapse other people's campaigns. Maybe you're right, Bob. Maybe you're right. Maybe I need to man up if I do indeed believe that is a strategy. I want that to take place, though, with people not voting for them, not necessarily voting for Trump. And the same effect can take place, so it still has the benefit of that person not getting one of your votes. All right, I'm going to leave this here because at this point, I feel like I'm dragging ass. I want to say like, share, and of course, subscribe. It's funny. This is not a contributor appreciation, even though for some reason it feels like one. All right, yeah, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in a few.